And when an empath falls in love with a narcissist, and honestly, it's one of the most emotionally draining relationships you can experience. People enter toxic relationships all the time, but nothing compares to the connection between an empath and a narcissist. It may look like love, but in reality, it's a dangerous imbalance. Empaths are not weak. They are strong, deeply emotional, and carry the weight of others without breaking. They are healers. They feel everything, and they give everything. But that's exactly what makes them vulnerable to narcissists, because narcissists don't come to heal, they come to take. Every relationship between an empath and a narcissist begins the same way, not with red flags, or rather with red flags so expertly disguised as green ones that even the most perceptive empath cannot immediately distinguish between them. It begins with what feels, in every measurable emotional sense, like the relationship the empath has always been waiting for. The beginning is intoxicating. That is not an exaggeration. It is the precise word for what happens neurologically and emotionally when an empath encounters a narcissist in the early stage of the dynamic. The narcissist, in those first weeks and months, directs toward the empath the full force of their attention. Their charm, their apparent depth, the particular focused, seemingly genuine interest of someone who appears to finally see, really see, everything the empath has always hoped would be recognized in them. For the empath, this is overwhelming in the most positive sense, because the empath has spent their life seeing other people, feeling other people, prioritizing other people's emotional reality so consistently and so automatically that their own interior world has often gone unwitnessed. And here, suddenly, is someone who appears to be doing for them what they have always done for everyone else, seeing them, choosing them, making them feel, perhaps for the first time, like the recipient, rather than the perpetual provider of that quality of focused, devoted attention. Here is the brutal truth about that beginning. It is a performance, not always consciously calculated, though in many cases the calculation is more deliberate than the empath ever discovers. But functionally, operationally, in terms of what it is designed to produce and what it actually produces, it is the opening move of a dynamic that the narcissist's psychology has been running across every significant relationship of their life. The love bombing, the mirroring, the uncanny sense that this person shares your values, your depth, your vision for what love and life and genuine connection should look like. Because they are reflecting back to you precisely what you have shown them you most need to see. The sense of finally being understood, finally being matched, finally having found the person whose depth is equal to your own. Built not from their genuine interior life, but from their extraordinary skill at reading yours and presenting it back to you as themselves. The empath gives everything in this phase, not strategically, not with measurement or self-protective reservation, with the full, unguarded, completely genuine devotion of someone who has finally, they believe, found a place where everything they carry is not too much, where the love they are capable of has finally found a container worthy of it. Here is the shocking realization, the narcissist's most intense effort, the phase of maximum charm, maximum attention, maximum apparent investment, happens at the beginning, not because the relationship means the most to them then, because that is when the empath is most available to be convinced, when the foundation of the dynamic is being laid, when the patterns of giving and receiving are being established that will govern everything that follows. The beginning is not the promise of what the relationship will become. It is the bait for what it actually is. And the empath, loving completely, giving completely, believing completely, takes it, not from weakness, from the most genuine and the most costly form of faith available to a human heart. Once the foundation is set, once the empath's full emotional investment has been secured, once the pattern of devotion has been established and the narcissist has confirmed that the supply is reliable, the dynamic shifts, not dramatically, not in a single visible moment that the empath can point to and say, there, that is when everything changed. Gradually, incrementally, in the slow, almost imperceptible tightening of a dynamic that began to reorganize itself, the moment the narcissist felt confident the empath would stay. Control becomes the organizing principle of the relationship, not announced, not named, but present in every interaction, every decision, every subtle redirection of the empath's attention, energy, and sense of reality back toward the narcissist's needs and away from their own. The narcissist does not want a partner. They want a center of gravity. They want to be the sun around which the empath's entire emotional world orbits, the source of validation, the arbiter of reality, the one whose mood determines the emotional weather of the entire relationship. And they achieve this not through obvious force, but through the particular, sophisticated, entirely deniable mechanisms of emotional manipulation that the narcissist has developed, consciously or not, across a lifetime of relationships. They make the empath feel chosen, specifically, specially, particularly chosen, as though the empath's connection to them is evidence of something extraordinary, about the empath something that makes them more deserving of the narcissist's ascension than anyone who came before. This feeling of being chosen becomes, over time, one of the most powerful mechanisms of control in the relationship, because the fear of losing that chosen status, of becoming ordinary, of returning to the unloved, unseen, unspecial state, the narcissist subtly implies would follow. The end of their attention keeps the empath working, perpetually, exhaustingly working, to maintain a level of giving that justifies their continued selection. Here is the brutal truth about control in this dynamic. The empath does not recognize it as control. They recognize it as love. The vigilance they maintain around the narcissist's moods they call attentiveness. The self-suppression they practice in service of keeping the peace they call compromise. The gradual narrowing of their own needs, preferences, and interior life to accommodate the narcissist dominance they call devotion. This is the most precise and the most damaging aspect of the narcissistic relationship for the empath, that the very qualities that make them extraordinary as human beings are the ones being used against them. Their attunement becomes their surveillance of the narcissist's emotional state. Their compassion becomes their excuse for the narcissist's behavior. Their capacity for seeing the best in people becomes the mechanism by which they sustain a version of the narcissist that exists primarily in their own generous perception rather than in reality. Here is the realization that changes everything about how this stage is understood. The empath is not submitting to the control because they are blind. They are submitting because they are loyal, because their nature is oriented toward healing, toward understanding, toward finding the genuine humanity beneath the difficult behavior and loving it into visibility. And the narcissist, consciously or not, relies on precisely that orientation. They rely on the empath's healing instinct to keep them invested in a project of salvation that was never going to produce what the empath believed it would. The empath cannot heal the narcissist, not because healing is impossible, but because the narcissist is not in the relationship to be healed. Are in the relationship to be served. And the empath, loyal, devoted, certain that their love is sufficient, serves until the day they cannot. There comes a point in every empath-narcissist relationship when the empath's extraordinary capacity for tolerance reaches its limit. Not through a single dramatic incident, though dramatic incidents may occur, through the slow, cumulative, entirely inevitable accumulation of unmet needs, dismissed feelings, and the particular exhaustion of someone who has been giving everything into a dynamic that has been returning almost nothing. The empathy enter begins to push back, not aggressively, that is not who they are, but with the increasing undeniable urgency of someone whose interior world has been neglected for so long that silence is no longer possible. They begin to name what they feel, to express what they need, to bring into the visible space of the relationship the reality of their own experience, which has been systematically excluded from that space for the entire duration of the dynamic. The narcissist's response is immediate and consistent. They reframe the empath's honest expression of need as attack. The empath's request for reciprocity becomes, in the narcissist's telling, selfishness. The empath's boundary becomes aggression. The empath's pain becomes manipulation. The empath's pain becomes manipulation, and the empath, whose fundamental orientation is toward understanding, toward self-examination, toward the honest consideration of whether they have contributed to a problem, takes that reframing seriously, considers it, applies their extraordinary capacity for self-reflection to the narcissist's accusation, and finds in the examination enough genuine imperfection to doubt themselves. This is the moment the narcissist has been engineering, consciously or through the deeply grooved patterns of a lifetime. The moment the empath's self-doubt can be ideated to redirect their energy away from the legitimate grievance and back toward the self-examination that keeps them internally focused and externally compliant. Conflicts become inevitable in this stage, not because the empath has changed, though they have changed, in the specific way that prolonged emotional deprivation changes even the most patient and giving people, but because the dynamic has reached its natural, unsustainable point, where the giving and the taking have become too imbalanced to maintain even the appearance of mutuality, where the empath's needs have grown too loud to be silenced by the narcissist's deflections, where something in the relationship is going to have to give, and when it finally breaks, when the relationship ends, in whatever form that ending takes, the empath feels guilty. This is perhaps the most precisely cruel outcome of the entire dynamic. The person who gave most feels most responsible for the failure. The person who tried hardest feels most like they did not try hard enough. The person who was consumed feels like the one who consumed. Here's the brutal truth about the guilt. It was installed, deliberately, systematically, across the entire duration of the relationship through the narcissist's consistent reframing of their own behavior as the empath's responsibility. Through the subtle, persistent suggestion that the empath's needs were excessive, their feelings were dramatic, their expectations were unreasonable. Through the hundreds of small moments in which the narcissist redirected the honest accounting of what was happening in the relationship back toward the empath's failings rather than their own. The guilt is not truth, it is residue, the last and most persistent mechanism of the control that governed the entire relationship, operating now, after the relationship has ended, to keep the empath from fully reclaim. In the clarity that the dynamic worked so hard to suppress, here is the realization that begins to dissolve it. Wanting to be treated with the same quality of care you extended is not selfishness. Needing reciprocity in a relationship that consumed everything you gave is not a character flaw. Ending something that was costing you your wholeness is not failure. It is the first act of genuine self-respect available to someone who spent years directing all of their respect outward. And it deserves to be honored, not as guilt, but as the most difficult and the most necessary decision you ever made. So here is what this understanding demands of you. Not gentle reflection, not the open-ended invitation to sit with these insights at a comfortable distance and let them slowly inform some future version of your choices. Direct, immediate, non-negotiable action on the most important question this dynamic has left unanswered in your life. Where are you still giving to someone who is only taking? Not in the past. In the relationship you have already identified, already named, already partially understood as the dynamic this script has described. But right now, in your current life, in the relationships you are currently maintaining, because habit because history, because the empath's deeply conditioned instinct to keep showing up even when showing up is costing them everything, that are organized around the same fundamental imbalance, where your extraordinary capacity for feeling, for caring, for remaining present in difficulty is being directed at someone who has no genuine intention of meeting it with anything equivalent. You know who that person is. Your intuition, the same intuition that was telling you something was wrong long before your conscious mind was willing to name it, is naming it right now, in the particular specific located way that real knowing always arrives, not as anxiety, not as accusation, as the quiet, clear, entirely honest recognition of a dynamic that is consuming you in ways you have been explaining away for long enough. Stop explaining it away. Stop applying your extraordinary capacity for understanding to the project of making someone else's failure to genuinely love you make sense. Stop using your empathy, your gift, your genuine superpower as the mechanism by which you absorb the consequences of someone else's inability to care for you the way you care for them. Your empathy was never meant to be given without limit to people who treat limitlessness as an entitlement. It was never meant to be the substitute for the genuine reciprocity that a real relationship requires. It was never meant to be the thing that makes an imbalanced dynamic sustainable, the extraordinary giving of one person compensating indefinitely for the extraordinary taking of another. You are not here to balance the imbalance by giving more. You are here to recognize the imbalance and make a choice about whether you continue to participate in it. That choice, clear, honest, made with the full weight of everything you now understand about this dynamic, is the most important gift you can give yourself. More important than any understanding, any insight, any perfectly articulated recognition of what has been happening. Because understanding without action is just sophisticated awareness of a wound you have decided to keep open. The empath who awakens to this dynamic does not become less loving. They become more precise. They direct what they carry, all of it, the full extraordinary depth of their capacity for genuine connection, toward people and relationships that are genuinely capable of receiving it. That can meet it. That will honor it with the quality of presence and reciprocity it has always deserved. That is not settling foe, but is finally, completely refusing to settle for it. You have felt enough for people who felt nothing for you. You have given enough to people who gave nothing back. You have stayed long enough in dynamics that were designed to consume you. Now, finally, completely, without apology, choose yourself, not as the end of your love, as the beginning of where it actually belongs.